All right, so we're going to get started now. Welcome everyone to this first week of our 4-week white fragility discussion. When I wanted to just begin by thanking you all for registering and for taking this time to join us. And just as a bit of an update, I know you all have been receiving several emails. We've been having to be flexible with this course because of such a high interest in this in the community. It's been wonderful to see how many folks have wanted to engage with this and to participate and to deepen their anti-racist work. And so because of that interest, alongside safety concerns of having so many folks in breakout rooms who didn't know each other around such a sensitive topic, we erred to go with a webinar format, which is what you all will see here. So unfortunately, we won't be able to see each other since there's over 200 of us in the webinar at this moment. But just know that your all's presence is felt wherever you're calling in, whether it's Louisville, somewhere else in the US, somewhere else in the world. Joe and I both welcome you and are glad you're here. One way that you all will be able to engage in the group is through the Q&A function. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a little Q&A bar with the little speech bubbles. And throughout the webinar, I'd like to invite you all to send us any thoughts, reactions, comments, as well as questions that you all have. And towards the end of the session tonight, we'll pause for a moment in the presentation, and Joe will take some questions that I'll share with him, as well as thoughts or comments, just so we can gauge a reaction to the class. And with that, I actually like to begin just by offering a brief grounding meditation. And we'll take a few moments just to settle into the space together this evening. You might like to close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, or maybe softening the gaze down to the floor. Just beginning to feel your body resting in this seat, resting in this space this evening. Just feeling into the weight of your left foot connecting to the earth. Feeling into the weight of the right foot. If it's all right with the neck, just beginning to turn and looking over your left shoulder, moving your body as far as it'll go, looking over the hip, over the shoulder, pausing for an in-breath and an out-breath. And then on the next breath, returning back to center, pausing again. And then moving over to the right side, as far as comfortable as with the neck, with the body, knowing that moving our body can help us settle into the space, ground us before we dive into our conversation. Moving back to center when you're ready. And just taking a couple breaths here, letting go of anything you might be carrying with you from your day, noticing what expectations are present before this webinar, checking in with any sensations in the body, curiosity, of anxiety, of settledness. Just noting the state of your body, of your mind in this moment. Whenever you're ready, just beginning to open the eyes or returning your gaze back to the room. With that, I also realized I forgot to introduce myself. I was so keen on getting us started on time. So I'm Parker Bowling. I work at the Earth and Spirit Center, facilitating trauma-sensitive mindfulness programs as well as spiritual ecology programs to help folks connect to nature. I'm also a social worker by vocation, and it's a pleasure to join you all in joining Joe to support this program. But with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Joe to get started.
Thank you, Parker, and thanks to all of you for signing up. Just a moment before we went on live, I got a message that said my internet connection is unstable, and so if I become unstable again, I'm going to ask Parker to kind of kick in and help out or whatever. My name is Joe Phelps. I was for 21 years the pastor here in Louisville at Highland Baptist Church. retired from there a couple of years ago. I'm now working with the Earth and Spirit Center in Louisville, Kentucky. It's a spiritual community that offers courses and community in meditation, in environmental stewardship, and in the area of justice. And I'm the justice coordinator with them. I also serve with Dr. Kevin Cosby as the co-chair of Empower West Louisville, which is a Black and white clergy coalition here in our city that has been working for the last 5 years on bringing awareness about racial issues to the people here in Louisville. Semester, Joe Mitchell and I taught a class on racial equity and meditation. And in that class, we had 10 weeks and we had 2 hours each session. And the other thing is I could see the people. I could gauge their reactions. I could entertain questions. I could see if they were responding to my corny jokes. I could clarify. They could ask questions. We don't have that opportunity here, but I hope you will ask any questions that you can, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. The other thing is, the other reality of with the other class, well, people in a particular course of study. So we had a common language and vocabulary, and we kind of knew each other. The reality is I don't have any idea who I'm talking to right now, but I do know that we come from a wide array of experiences and understandings and levels of experience and education in this area of racial justice. So I realize that much of what I say may be very redundant and old for many of you, but I hope I can put together something here that will there are tons of material out there right now. Everyone's talking about racial equity, about white fragility, about all of the issues that we're going to be talking about. But just because there's a lot of information out there doesn't mean people are accessing it. And even if they're accessing it, doesn't necessarily mean that people integrate it, internalize it, let it change their life. So that's what we want to do in this time, is try to help discover that white America has had its knee on the neck of Black America for over 400 years. I know that lots of people are saying lines like that, but when the truthfulness of that happens in you, when you awaken, when you get it deep down, where you make your most foundational choices and decisions in life, when you get it at that level, then everything changes. You see the world in a I'm not sure what just happened there, but my all of my notes went away. Okay, so I'm going to offer what I can. I'm not going to try to make it too fancy. There are lots of fancy presentations out there. There are a lot of funny ones. Dave Chappelle, Trevor Noah, Saturday Night Live. They're all doing great things. There are great things that churches are doing out there. There's countless lists out there and books out there. But I want us to focus on these 4 areas for the 4 weeks. Parker, if you can put on the screen. Am I still on?
Yes, you are, Joe. I turned your video off, just FYI, because you were freezing quite a bit. So folks can't see you, but they can.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So they can hear me, but they can't see me?
Yes, and the PowerPoint is up as well. So you're on the right slide.
Perfect. I like this much better. Okay. So you're looking at a slide that shows kind of where I'm going to take us. Today, we're going to talk about the Great White Awakening and try to see the issue of racism as if for the first time. Then talk about what it means to be white next week, white supremacy and socialization. I've got a lot of experience in this. I'm a really white guy, so I bring a lot of expertise, privilege, and how it plays out in TV, media, education, housing, wealth building, and our politics. And then the last week, I'm excited, we'll have a conversation with Dr. Ricky Jones, who is the Pan-African Studies Chair, Department Chair at the University of Louisville, a brilliant man and a great conversation partner. So let's kick in. I mentioned the group Empower West Louisville, a black and white clergy coalition. 5 years ago, we began a tradition called the annual book. The first year, we picked out a book entitled The Half Has Never Been Told, a book by Edward Baptist, who is a Cornell historian. We picked it out because it was a book that spoke deeply to the history of slavery in America, but also elucidated how slavery was really the backbone of the American capitalist economy, and brought it to bear in such a way, Baptist brings it to bear in such a way that it transforms. Only able to read like 5 to 10 pages at a time because it's just so very brutal. Let me read just one excerpt. It's about a man named Edward Briscoe, who was a slave trader. Although he didn't kill all of his slaves, or any of his slaves, he'd done worse than that, and was known all through the country as the Negro ruler. He used this argument: it didn't matter how good they were, they must be whipped once a year to let them know they were Negroes. 2 old men that had been working with him for years, Jim and John, after they were 70 years of age, were taken just before Christmas, stripped and bent over a barrel and given 50 lashes each. A colored man, who they called Luke, who was a good worker, not being willing to submit to his inhumane treatment, Briscoe was called in to whip and break him, as he called it. Things went along for some time, he trying all the time to find some fault to get a chance to whip Luke. He had about 100 acres of potatoes to pick up and was watching to see if they were all picked clean. Coming on where Luke was working, discovered a few small potatoes in a row and commenced to abuse him in a brutal manner, kicking him, knocking him on the head with his cane. The bloodhounds are and shooting him to the ground. A conveyance was sent for, and Luke was taken to the house, tied to a tree in the yard called the Heavenward Tree, where Briscoe whipped his Negroes. The ground for some distance around him was soaked with human blood. Truth is, that's actually not from The Half Has Never Been Told. I found yesterday when I went to prepare that I'd let that book out to someone else. That is a story that took place about a mile from here, mile from my home, up on Bardstown Road on land. We had after we did the book read, we had a gathering of some 600 people at Crescent Hill Baptist Church, and the author came and we talked about the book. It was very, very moving. And people signed up to be in study groups. We put people in these study groups and invited them to talk together, black and white. And we had 3 groups at Simmons College of Kentucky one evening. There were about 15 people in a group. So I didn't really hear when a woman made a comment, but I heard the response of a black man who kind of out of nowhere said, "How could you not know? How could you not see that?" Well, all the other groups stopped and became quiet in the room, and the focus was on a woman who had who had made the comment that this is all new information to me. I went to college, but I didn't know how completely horrible slavery was. The black man was asking her, how could you think people were slaves? How could you not know it was so horrible? Why would people be slaves unless they were physically forced to? The tension in the room was enormous. It was one of those pivotal moments in life. And I wonder, if you had been in charge of the meeting, what would you have said? How would you have reacted? Would you have called him down? Would you have come to the defense of the woman? Would you how would you react? Would you be wounded and hurt? Would you try to explain yourself and kind of overtalk it? Would you feel threatened? Like the woman in Central Park with the Cocker Spaniel who for some reason felt threatened? Would you feel threatened? Would you quit and leave? Kind of wipe the dust off your feet and say, well, I'm not talking to them anymore. White privilege is really never asking the question, what happened? It's never occurring. It never occurs to white privileged people to ask, oh, is my knee on your neck? Why have we never asked those questions deeply? Is it willful? Are we compassion recessive? Do we not have compassion? Or is it like Jack Nicholson said in Top Gun, we can't handle the truth? That day, the group decided to recognize his passion and pain, to listen deeply to the question and feel the truthfulness of it and see it as if for the very first time, to say, you know, you're right. I don't know. I need to know more. No matter how many classes I've taken, no matter how many Black friends I've had, no matter my life experience and where I'm from, all of us who are white have more that we need to see and learn and unlearn and relearn. And so I want to introduce you to an author, a speaker, Robin DiAngelo, called Fragility. Robin DiAngelo is a profound thinker. She's smart. She says a lot quickly. Her content is thick. So we're going to listen to it. It's about a 10-minute video of just her. I'm sorry, it's another talking head, but listen to her. And then when we come back, I'd like to try to break it down just a little bit. Parker.
All systems of oppression are highly adaptive, and they can adapt to challenges and incorporate them. They can allow for exceptions. And I think the most effective adaptation of the system of racism to the challenges of the civil rights movement was to reduce a racist to a very simple formula. A racist is an individual, always an individual, not a system, who consciously does not like people based on race, must be conscious, and who intentionally seeks to be mean to them. Individual conscious intent. And if that is my definition of a racist, then your suggestion that anything I've said or done is racist or has a racist impact, I'm going to hear that as you just said I was a bad person. You just put me over there in that category. And most of my bias anyway is unconscious. So I'm not intending, I'm not aware. So now I'm going to need to defend my moral character. And I will, and we've all seen it. It seems to be virtually impossible, based on that definition, for the average white person to look deeply at their socialization, to look at the inevitability of internalizing racist biases, developing racist patterns, and having investments in the system of racism, which is pretty comfortable for us and serves us really well. I think that definition of a racist, that either or, what I call the good-bad binary, is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic, because it makes it virtually impossible to talk to the average white person about the inevitable absorption of a racist worldview that we get by being literally swimming in racist water. So let me connect that to myself. As a result of being raised as a white person in this society, I have a racist worldview. I have deep racist biases. I have developed racist patterns. And I have investments in the system of racism because it's served me really well. It's comfortable. It's helped me overcome the barriers that I do face. And I also have an investment in not seeing any of that for what it would suggest to me about my identity and what it would require of me, right? I didn't choose any of that. I don't feel guilty about it. It is an inevitable result of being raised in this society in which racism is the bedrock. The question of guilt comes in what am I doing about that? While we who are white tend to be fragile in that it doesn't take much to upset us around race, the impact of our response is not fragile at all. It's a kind of weaponized defensiveness, weaponized hurt feelings, right? And it functions really, really effectively to repel the challenge. You know, as a white person, I move through the world racially comfortable virtually 24/7. It is exceptional for me to be outside of my racial comfort zone. And most of my life, I've been warned not to go outside my racial comfort zone. And so on the rare occasion when I am uncomfortable racially, it's a kind of throwing off of my racial equilibrium. And I need to get back into that. And so I will do whatever it takes to repel the challenge and get back into it. And in that way, I think white fragility functions as a kind of white racial bullying, to be frank. We make it so miserable for people of color to talk to us about our inevitable and often unaware racist patterns that we cannot help develop from being socialized into a culture in which racism is the bedrock and the foundation. We make it so miserable for them to talk to us about it that most of the time they don't. Right? And we just have to understand that most people of color that are working or living in primarily white environments take home way more daily slights and hurts and insults than they bother talking to us about, because their experience is they're going to risk more punishment. They're going to lose the relationship. They're going to have their experience minimized, explained away. They're going to cause the person to feel attacked or hurt. And in that way, white fragility functions as a kind of everyday white racial control. None of that has to be intentional or conscious, but that is how it functions. And it's actually incredibly liberating and transformative to start from the premise that, of course, I've internalized all of this, and then I can stop defending, deflecting, denying, hoping you won't notice, minimizing, explaining, and I can just let go of that and get to work. And there's a question that's never failed me in my efforts to unpack. How do we pull this off? How do so many of us who are white individually feel so free of racism, and yet we live in a society that is so profoundly separate and unequal by race? And the question that's never failed me is not, is this true or is this false? Is this right or is this wrong? But how does it function? How do these narratives that I tell, how do they function? When I tell you, well, I'm just an individual, why can't we all just be individuals? When I tell you, I was taught to treat everyone the same. When I tell you, but it's focusing on race that divides us. When I tell you, but I have lots of friends of color. Those narratives have not changed our outcome, and they function to take race off the table and to exempt the person from any further engagement. And in doing that, they function to protect the current racial hierarchy and the white position within it. It doesn't have to be what I'm intending to do, but it is the impact of those narratives.
Thank you all so much. We're going to pause for one moment, actually, and we're fixing the audio issues that Joe was having. So if you just bear with us for one moment, we'll be back on the line.
Parker, can you hear me?
Yes, Joe, I can hear you on your phone, on your computer.
Is that going to work? If I call that other number, it tells me I'm as a participant, I'm going to be muted.
Yeah, Joe, I'm fixing you right now. Hold on a sec.
For the computer.
Joe, can you call back in with the number I saw your number and then it disappeared.
Will you call back in? Yeah. I'm so sorry.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Am I on?
Enter your participant ID. Please enter the meeting password followed by pound. You have joined the meeting as an attendee and will be muted throughout the meeting.
All right,
Okay.
Joe, you're able to talk on your phone. Can you try that?
I can, but I'm getting an echo.
Turn your video off. You don't need it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, am I on?
Can you shut out of your Zoom, your other Zoom on your computer? It's still echoing because of that. Okay, you should be good.
Okay.
Yeah, and I will share my screen again.
Oh, is everybody still there? If they are, thank you all. Okay, can I start, Parker?
Yes, you're back to the slide after the video.
All right, thank you all. I'm so sorry. Robin DiAngelo did a beautiful job of saying a lot in those 10 minutes. So one of the things she says is that systems of oppression are good at adapting in order to keep themselves in power. And one of the ways they do that is to reduce the definition of racism, as she says, to 3 points. It has to be individual, has to be conscious, and it has to be intentional. So if that's the definition, when someone raises the question of racism, the person who hears that presumes that the other person is saying that you're a bad person. And they become, because they're not conscious of being racist, they didn't intend it, they weren't aware of it. And so for many people, shame kicks in, and they need to defend their character when their shame kicks in, and they start asking defensive questions. That's why it's almost impossible for people to look deeply inside. So as DiAngelo says, to be clear, if you define racist as someone who holds a conscious dislike of people because of race, then she says, I agree that it would be offensive for me to suggest that you're a racist if I don't know you. But then she gives a better definition of racism as a far-reaching system that functions independently from the intentions of or self-images of the individual actors. In other words, it doesn't have to do with an individual. It doesn't have to do with being conscious. It doesn't have to do with being intentional. It's the system that works. And the reason I like this so much is because DiAngelo takes the shame out of the racism question. She deshames it. In fact, she raises her hand and says right off the bat, hey, as a result of being raised in a racist culture where racism is inevitable, I have a racist worldview. I've developed racist understandings and biases. I have an investment in the system of racism because it served me so well. I feel entitled to it. I feel I deserve it, that I've earned it. And finally, it's better for me not to see how white identity benefits me. The reason she's able to de-shame that is that she's making these statements as statements of fact, not judgment. not about being guilty. We didn't choose any of those things. D'Angelo says the guilt comes in what you do about this. And so she would say it's important because when we feel guilty about racism, we become defensive. And white fragility kicks in, this notion that your worldview is being threatened. And so you weaponize your hurt feelings, as she puts it. How dare you say such an offensive thing about me that I made a racist statement? And the result is we miss the opportunity to learn something new. It takes us off the hook. It says, I'm not a racist, this isn't my problem, so that there's nothing that I can do about it. Parker, I don't know if you put the little graphic up about the process. A concern is raised, people become defensive, white fragility kicks in, we weaponize our feelings, and we either let ourselves off the hook saying this, I'm not a racist, because it says this, I'm not a racist worldview, will guarantee that a person will not build on their skills in thinking critically about racism or use their position to challenge racial inequality. So she wants us to focus on the real definition of racism that gets at the systems that work behind the individual acts and attitudes. And I know a lot of us right now are wanting to talk about those systems, and it is hugely important that we do this. And on many fronts, people are raising those questions even now, here in Louisville and all around the country. But before we rush too quickly to the what do we do, how do we fix this problem, we need to go back and think again about the question of racism, because white fragility has a way of kicking in and trying to explain away our feelings that are racist at their core. And if we don't look at them, then if they're unexamined, they just go unchecked and unquestioned. D'Angelo explains that people use what she calls colorblind statements to deflect and get away from the feeling of white fragility. If you have the book, you can see on page 77 a list of some colorblind claims. I was taught to treat everyone the same, or this person just happens to be black, but that has nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you. Or the statement, focusing on race is what divides us. I've been hearing that a lot lately. Or I'm not a racist, I'm from Canada or some other place. Or I was picked on because I was white and I grew up poor, so I don't have racism. These are all efforts to try to claim color blindness as a way to defend against white fragility. The other way is through what she calls color celebrate statements. I see color, but I embrace color. I'm woke. So I work in a very diverse environment. I have people of color in my family. I was in the military. These are all color celebrating statements. D'Angelo doesn't want to argue about any of the facts of the claims that people are making. What she wants to ask is this question: how does this claim, whether it's a colorblind claim or the color celebrating claim, how does that claim function in the conversation? Does it exempt the speaker from needing to learn anymore? Well, I went to a all-black high school, so I don't need to learn these things. Or does it take the race conversation off the table? Or does it, frankly, reveal some ignorance of the socialization that we've all experienced? Or is it a way to deflect any responsibility, any role in repairing the damage that has been done by racism? D'Angelo asked the question, if this is your evidence of that you're not racist, how are you defining racism? Again, how we define racism is so central. She gives this another author's definition of racism in the book. This one's a little more elaborate, but it's very comprehensive. Racism is a systemic, societal, institutional, omnipresent, and epistemologically embedded phenomena. That's a big old mouthful, but it means it's a complete, within the system, within the society, all of our institutions, it's everywhere. It's how we know things. It's how we think that pervades every vestige of our reality. For most whites, however, racism is like murder. The concept exists, but someone has to commit it in order for it to have happened. This limited view of such a multi-layered syndrome cultivates the sinister nature of racism and perpetuates the racist phenomena rather than eradicating them. So now, at the risk of sounding like a Baptist preacher, I want to talk about good news, because I think that people can have their eyes opened. It doesn't happen magically. It doesn't happen instantaneously. But with effort and courage and community and a willingness to move from the safety of our own little nest, we can awaken. We can see what we've ignored, what we've overlooked, what we've averted our eyes from. We can learn about American history and help explain that will help us explain why things are the way they are. Why are things the way they are? Why does my side of town look the way it does and the Black community look the way it does? Is it because we're better people, we're better money managers, we're better homeowners? Or is it because of other factors that we've never really fully named and acknowledged and recognized and interpreted? We're being invited to notice things in the world that we've never noticed before. And we're being invited as white people to live in this space of awakening to new things in such a way that discomfort sets in. Our equilibrium has been compromised. Our balance is off. We experience kind of an emotional vertigo, if you will. Like just the day before yesterday, I was sitting on my front porch. My dog was sitting in the love seat next to me. I had a guitar, my computer, my beverage. When the city bus pulled up at the corner right in front of my house and stopped at the four-way stop, and someone got on the bus. So the bus sat there for a moment. And the Black passenger sitting in the window seat looked out his window at me, and our eyes met. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. And that bus just sat there. And I wondered where he was going. Wondered if he had a car, or if he was coming to work, or going to work, or coming home, and I realized how vastly different our lives probably were. Does my naming that make you feel uncomfortable? Kind of cringe? I wonder if you get any hint of that acidy taste on your tongue that I had that day. Hang on. Welcome to the Great White Awakening. Seeing racism as if for the first time. I use that phrase, the Great White Awakening. It's sort of a play on a phrase from American history. There were a couple of events called Great Awakenings, one in the 1700s, Jonathan Edwards preaching about sinners in the hands of an angry God. Then later in the 1800s, one that was related to prohibition and then abolition even. But I want to talk about the Great White Awakening. When we come to that place where we realize that religion is about more than an angry God or a God who doesn't want us to do this or that. but that there's harmony and equality and equity and justice and peace that are the desired intention for this world. We need to be willing to be vulnerable enough to step into that and ask questions about our own whiteness, the racism that surrounds the lives that we live. My friend Chris Caldwell wrote an article, as many people have, and offered a few suggestions, and I'm going to use them. First thing he says is, know that it will be a journey. Many of us, many people these days are awakening to the reality of racism and systemic injustice in our world related to Black people, but they're coming into it with such fervor and excitement that they need to be reminded, we all need to be reminded, that this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is a journey that we're going to be taking probably for the rest of our lives and the rest of our children's lives for a long, long time. So know it's going to be a journey. But begin the process. Start reading books and watching movies of Black people telling their story as they see fit to tell it. To do some economic and historical homework. And there are all kinds of books, starting with The Half Has Never Been Told, that you can read and begin to understand and see more deeply. And then showing up in Black space. By that, I mean not only going to restaurants and places where Black people work and play, but showing up in church, showing up in classes at the historically Black college, showing up in opportunities where you can maybe even interact with someone. The challenge of racism is with us for the rest of our lives, and it for me all centers not in how much we can know, how many books we can read, how many seminars we can attend, but rather how willing we are to have our eyes opened. The tradition from which I did my work always talked about the man who opened blind eyes, who helped people see what they were unable to see. That's still the work of love that we're called to today. So I thank you for being part of this, and I'm going to see if Parker has any questions or comments that we can use to wrap this up before we end. Parker?
Yes, give me one moment. If folks have questions, please go ahead and send them into the Q&A so we'll be able to view them. Or you can send them in the chat function as well. For folks, I think some folks are raising their hands. Do you all mind putting the your question in the chat function or in the Q&A so I can see it as well?
And while Parker's queuing up some questions, I apologize for the technical problems we've had. Man, it just makes it that much more complicated for someone who's used to talking to people face to face to even know how to communicate. These are strange times we live in, and I thank you all for hanging with us.
Yeah, great, Joe. So there's a couple of questions coming in. There's some coming in. So I'm going to address a couple people are asking questions about the formatting. So I just want to acknowledge those that, yes, we are aware that the format that was originally advertised a couple of weeks ago for the course, that that has been changed, and it moved away from a discussion-based platform because of the size of interest in the class and the number of folks who had signed up. We didn't feel like we'd be able to manage discussion groups in a way that created safety for all of the folks who were in the space. So we wanted to create an uncomfortable, challenging space, but at the same time, these are still sensitive issues, and also we're very aware Zoom is not Zoom is not a very secure platform, and so apologies, at risk of putting community members in an uncomfortable or an unsafe position, particularly folks who might not know each other in these big groups. We decided to change that format. So I apologize for that for anyone who's expecting something different than what format we had for this evening. We will be hoping to do a class that follows up on this 4-week session that will have smaller engagement groups where we will be able to have these discussions, and we will be able to have those facilitated and moderated by folks so we can ensure that there's safety. Let's see. I'm going to pick a couple of questions as well here, Joe. So Joe, one participant said, I've had experiences similar to yours with the man on the bus. I think my question is, what do you do with that? Or is this class a part of that?
It's a great question. What do you do with it? What I have done with it is let it make me uncomfortable and let it and allow myself to live with reflect on the realities that have made my life end up the way it has, as different from most people who live, I'm going to say, in West Louisville, which is our predominantly Black part of our city. So I try to not let it take me into that place of guilt, but I do invite it to call me to task and to call me to accountability. Scripture says, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so those kind of moments invite me to be grateful for the life I've been given, but also to be a better steward of it going forward. I think it also, those kind of moments remind me, because I as a community leader, I'm often talking with Black leaders and white leaders at sort of a theoretical level, that this has to do with human beings who have eyes just as passionate and just as engaging and lovely as my children's. And that awakens something in me about the equality of us all. So those are a couple of things I do with those moments. Mainly, I let myself feel uncomfortable, though.
Yes, thank you for that, Joe. A couple I want to address. There's a full range of questions coming in. So there's certain questions about the book as well. And in addition to the format change, something that drove that primarily for us was that it's still quite difficult to get a copy of White Fragility in paperback. So we ended up pivoting away that the text isn't mandatory. So folks don't need to read that to engage in the class. But we're kind of moving through the original schedule we had outlined, that the first 3 chapters are covered this week. The next 3 will be next week. So folks who want to follow along can do that, and Joe will be following that path as well, but it's not required or expected that you have read before coming to class. And for folks who would like, people are also sharing that if you would like to read White Fragility, you can still get it on Kindle. You can get it on Audible or audiobooks, as well as Carmichael's just got a stack in today. So folks also want to pick that up. I was there earlier and they have some, and they might be sold out now. Other technical
people.
Joe, sorry.
I said that's for people in Louisville. Yes.
For people in Louisville, yes. Sorry. Also, follow up. This recording of this webinar will be made available tomorrow. So we will send an email to everyone who participated with the link to how to access that. So within that recording, you will be able to see the PowerPoint. We will also be able to share resources, follow-up resources, readings, discussion questions. All of that will be included. Joe, one question I wanted to talk talk about was some folks are bringing up the idea of shame, and the questions are kind of centering around: is there a way that shame can be a feeling that's productive for us to feel? So I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that and that point that Robin DiAngelo made in her video.
Yeah. I don't find shame and guilt as shame to be an effective motivator for change. Shame can get me to conform, but shame never liberates. And I think what white people need liberation from racism as much or more than Black people, because it's our stunted worldview that has created the conditions that we think of now as systemic racism. So shame only leads us more into that ego-driven, fear-driven kind of mentality. I think the preference is to say, I have been given much. I have been, for example, I'll speak of myself. I'm a cisgendered white male in 2020, college educated. I've been given by life every opportunity to succeed. So what can I do with what I have and who I am and all that my life experiences have made me to bring good into the world, and especially on this subject? And I think every person can find her or his own place in this larger story of recreation that is about to break forth as more and more people have their eyes opened. I think there's a role for everyone. Not everyone needs to be out in the streets marching, protesting. We need people who will make food for the protesters. We need people who will babysit the kids of the protesters. We need to get beyond after protesting. What are we going to do that will change conditions in our city, that will bring equity? So everyone has a role in that. Shame doesn't help any of that.
Thank you for that, Joe. I'm aware of our time, so I'd like to maybe invite one or two more questions. And one that I'm kind of seeing coming up in several different threads is for folks who, referring to the Chris Caldwell article you're talking about, of when we're engaging with Black folks in one question is kind of how do we ask for their take on something, particularly people we might be friends with or might be coworkers or in our family. How do we ask for their take without sounding condescending, as well as folks asking about just ways to navigate accessing Black spaces if they don't belong to any organizations that might be predominantly Black, or they might not be in any spaces where they're currently in community with Black neighbors. How do they go about doing that in a way that's authentic?
Oh, whoever asked that, those are really important questions. Yeah, and if you read, we're sending you the link to Chris's article, and actually there's points 5 and 6, and one of them is don't expect Black people to do all your work for you. And I know we've heard a lot of that a lot, and frankly, I left it off because while I think it's true, I also think that there are going to be our Black people who will hear our questions as condescending, but I just feel like there's going to be an equal or more number who are going to have just a bit more patience with us to let us ask it one more time and be idiots one more time and put our foot in our mouth one more time. I feel like this moment, as we move toward having our eyes opened, my experience has been that the Black community is welcoming and gracious and will help guide us to see more of what we need to see. As far as getting into Black spaces, I think most of the community groups, the Interfaith Paths to Peace, for example, or El-Surge, or certainly our faith communities, all have direct connections to Black organizations and individuals who really are ready and willing to join hands with us and form friendships, form relationships, but mostly get at the work of justice in our city. And so I'd say take a chance. If someone bites your head off, just understand that not everybody's ready for the conversation, and find somebody else to talk to.
Thank you. Joe, one last quick question, then I'll turn it over to you to wrap it up. But I think this is kind of fundamental, that if some folks are wondering, we talk about white fragility and racism. A lot of this conversation, or all of it, is centered around white fragility in relation to Black communities and racism towards Black people in general. And so someone had just asked, where other minority races, the way they phrase it, where does this belong in this discussion? And if you could just briefly speak about that, why we're using this language of white fragility around Black bodies and Black communities in this course.
We are speaking about, well, I tend to speak mostly about American descendants of slave, ADOS, as distinct from people of color. And the reason I do so is, having listened for a number of years to my friend and colleague, Dr. Kevin Cosby, talk about what makes Black Americans' claims for justice and cries for justice distinct among the many cries for justice in the world today. And I take him seriously. I think it's time to talk specifically about Black America. And really, the term white, we'll talk next week about where this whole notion of white came from and the whole question of race. But white fragility is a way to frame the whole conversation around why it's hard for white people to even enter into the conversation about race. And why, and if you can't talk, you can't, as Dr. Cosby says, you can't fix what you will not face. So we have to face it before we can fix it.
Thanks for that, Joe. I'd like to just invite you, I know we have a minute left, so I'd like to turn it over for you for any follow-up last-minute thoughts or comments you'd like to offer.
I look forward to next week, where hopefully we'll have some technical problems worked out, and we can move more smoothly through the conversation and in exchange. So look forward to the conversation continuing. There's a lot going on in our city. There's a lot going on in our world. It feels to me we do need people who are out there shouting and demanding, but we also need a great host of people who are calm and wise and reasoned and ready to tackle this issue in the long, slow ways that are going to really make substantive change. So I thank you all for being part of this.
Yeah, and thank you, Joe, and thank you for everyone who hopped on, and thank you again for bearing with us through the technical challenges as well as the change in format. So please look for emails from us to follow up on this. We'll have reading suggestions, suggested discussion questions, ways we continue to engage. So again, thanks everyone for attending, and we will see you next Monday.